welcome back to the Mel K Show. As you know, my guest today has been on many times. He's one of the best investigative journalists of our time. Very fearless. He has this great series, The Pyramid of Power. Everyone should watch and fully understand. And I am honored to have him here today because he has written his autobiography, which I'm sure will inspire many, many people out there. Thank you for joining me, Derrick Broze.
Thank you for having me on, Mel. I appreciate it.
Hello. So I'm excited about this because I had met you, I think through Union on the Unwanted or something when we both were like kicked off of everything and trying to figure out what we were going to do. And I had seen you for years. A lot of people don't know that famous Bradley Edwards interview all those years ago about the first Epstein case, you were the person that was interviewing him. I mean, that's how long you have been on the front lines. And it must be very exhausting for you to watch people breaking stories that you've been pounding out there for at least a decade. But you didn't start off that way. And I want you to tell your story a little bit without giving away the book. But this is really important for people to understand that you can do anything that you want to do. And I think you're proof of that. So take it away and let's talk about how you got there and why the book now.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mel. Yeah, so I mean, most people who know me, know my work, obviously through our interviews, know me as a journalist, as an activist, documentary filmmaker, etc. All the things that I've been doing for the last 16 years now. And that is, obviously, it's a big part of my life. It's my path and everything. I never really thought I would end up doing this. It wasn't something I set out to do as a young man or I went to college for or anything like that. My path to get to this place was a little bit different. It had a lot of, going in circles and ups and downs, lots of downs for sure. And I feel like it's time now for me to tell that story because actually as of November 16th, just last month, November 16th, 2025 was the 20-year anniversary of my arrest, November 16th, 2005, when I was 20 years old. I had been dealing with drug addiction for about 2 years right out of high school. I went into community college. I actually graduated early from high school and went into college right away. But like many people, I kind of got into partying and found myself, drinking way too much and then, taking Xanax and ecstasy and one thing led to another. And by January 2005, I ended up hooked on crystal meth. And within 10 months, I was locked up. I spent that year of 2005 basically homeless and kind of going through a lot of struggles and ended up with me being arrested. And so typically when I share this story, which I've shared bits and pieces of it over the years, whenever I've done some public presentations, I tell people like that was my first real awakening. Well before I ever kind of started learning about the End the Fed movement or any conspiracies or anything, I had this sort of spiritual awakening. And it was because of that arrest. Of course, I want to be clear, getting arrested and going to prison didn't change my life in terms of the prison system saved me or anything like that. These are horrible institutions that really have no redeeming value and are not about rehabilitation. But what it was is that when I got arrested, and as I said, 2 weeks after I got arrested, I turned 21, locked up, and I ended up doing a year behind bars the first time, and then I got out. I only lasted about 5 months, got sent back for another 3, and I kind of played that game back and forth for a couple of years until I was finally released in October 2008. By that point, I had served 19 months in Texas state institutions. I was a felon. According to the state of Texas, I'm still a felon. I kind of have created my own life, so it doesn't really matter anymore. But if I was to go, like, say, apply for a mainstream kind of normal job, they absolutely would judge me as a felon and treat me a certain way. I still, to this day, 20 years later, can't get rented a apartment in some parts of Houston. It's hard to get loans and all the sorts of things that you experience and that I experienced once you actually have that bullseye on your back as a felon. And so, yeah, I've been, growing as an activist and as a journalist. And I knew eventually I wanted to tell this story. And I kind of even knew that, all right, I'm going to put that off for a while. I'm going to wait till the 20th anniversary. So this summer I got to the work of writing down my story and really detailing my path from being a young, depressed little kid to becoming an angry, violent teenager to then eventually discovering drugs and thinking like, this is the happiness I was looking for. All I need to do is snort as many drugs as possible, and that'll be the key to happiness. And obviously, we know that's not the answer. And as I said, that led to me getting locked up and then becoming a felon. And it was a couple years after that I discovered Ron Paul, that I heard of Alex Jones, that I read Jim Marrs and all the other things. And that eventually led to me getting into activism, and then eventually journalism. So this book, this memoir, is basically a prequel to everything that people know before today. This is like, it has nothing to do with my activism, nothing to do with my journalism. In fact, the book ends essentially the first year or two of my activism. It just kind of sets the stage for what people know me today, but it really details that time between 2003, right out of high school, getting hooked on crystal meth, end up living in a crack meth house, getting locked up, my back and forth with the prison system, and then finally kind of starting to wake up, and in many ways, more ways than one. And so this is it's a brutally honest, gritty, real, raw tale of everything I've been through. It definitely doesn't shy away from showing some of the, as when you're dealing with addiction, you don't always treat yourself, and let alone other people, the best. And so I didn't shy away from putting those truths out there, and the way I treated women in some relationships I was in, the way I was abusing my body, both in physically, like cutting, but also drugs and alcohol abuse, obviously. And yeah, all those struggles. And then of course it kind of gets into some of the deeper nuances of as I did get locked up and I found myself in that space. Like I said, the prison system didn't save me, but I chose to use that time to really say, like, why the heck am I here? How did I get here? I come from a family of drug and addict alcoholics on both sides of my family, going back at least 3 generations. My own father had been in and out of prison my entire life until his overdose in 2018. And so I grew up visiting him in prison. And when I finally found myself there, it was just like, oh no, here I am, like continuing the family tradition. And I decided, like, I need to do something about this. I need to figure it out. And of course, it wasn't from one day to the next. It was an ongoing process, which I think still continues to this day. But yeah, it's there's a lot of stories and a lot I could share with you. And I'm just grateful that I know that we usually talk about my political reporting and everything like that. And I know that many people out there might not care so much about my story, but I think also what I'm discovering is that every time I share this story, even before writing the book, that I think addiction is a lot more prevalent than people realize. And I don't even mean just like in the mainstream normie world, but in our freedom, truth, conspiracy communities, even though we're more enlightened, or we might like to believe, I still think there are people who have this shame around it. And so they keep their stories quiet, or they keep their stories secret. And I've been very open about my struggles. And I think that's on purpose. Every time I share that, somebody will come up to me, or they'll email me, or they'll say, hey, I heard that, about this thing you went through. Here's how I've struggled, or I have a child who's doing that, or my son, or my father, or my brother, or my mother, or whatever. They share their story. And so a big part of me sharing and writing this book, not only is it part of my own healing journey, but to kind of put it out there and just hopefully to open the doors more for people to be authentic and realize that, addictions of all kinds, mine was drug and alcohol, but addictions of all kinds is just another way that this predator class can control us and can, get people locked in these horrible systems, which get you in that cycle of, in and out. I mean, I could list on 5 different hands the amount of people I know who I met who were locked up when I was locked up, some of who are still in and out of that system, others who didn't make it and they're dead.
That's why they say, but for the grace of God, go I, after that. And as you know, I wrote this book, Americans Anonymous, Restoring Power to the People, One Citizen at a Time. And in the 3rd section, I talk about my recovery as well. And I have to say, the best people I know are the people that I've met who have struggled through this and survived. Because when I left LA in 2012 for good, I had so many friends who OD'd or committed suicide over a probably 10-year period, people that you wouldn't even know that they were using or whatever. And being a writer, I started auditioning for Broadway and stuff at 17. And and I went through my own horrible hell and multiple ideation of suicide, to the point, like, if you want to, my sister is a psychiatrist. She always says, if you want to kill yourself, you're going to kill yourself. If you don't survive, if it doesn't work, then it's like a wake-up call to use that. So, thank God it didn't, but I certainly was there. And I just want to say, I believe that most of us, because we have a lot of friends in common in the movement, good people. I mean, a handful that we actually both are friends with in real life. And what I want to say is that every single one of them has a story like this. And it's not an accident, okay? It's not an accident at all. What it is that I have been through such hell that at this point, just that I'm alive is a miracle. But then when I got called to unveil this stuff, And then I was doing better. And then 2017, something really changed in me and I started really digging in. But I will tell you that the person I am now would never recognize that person, but I wouldn't be this without that, because it's a fearless idea of this is wrong, this is injustice, and if nobody else stands up, fine, but I'm going to. And it's a fearlessness that comes with surviving hell, in my opinion, and that too is part of it. You were in prison, and here's another thing I want people to understand. You ran for office and you should have been able to go there regardless of your past and run as an American citizen. And they blocked you at the very end and you had traction. And honestly, you earned it from all of the independent journalism you did for Houston. And see, like, because I have the same thing. People come back, they go back 25 years into my life. They find one thing, they create a whole story about it. It sinks me, it ruins me. I can't even believe that people would think this. And then when I was traveling the country, I realized so many people were suffering, and I knew it. And for me, my problem is that, my original problem, I think, is probably that so I'm probably 10 years older than you, but it was in my generation that they started medicating children very young. And I had a very chaotic home life at the time, and I was put on like pre-Prozac when I was like 8 or 9 years old. Okay, so until, after I was sober, got my shit together, and then I was put on and then they're trying to change the meds. And it wasn't until 2017 that I said, I'm just not going to take any of them anymore. And my life got so much better. And I never knew that. So when I was on the road with Reawaken and with The Truth About Cancer and all these, I met so many people that were broken and sad, and that's why I wrote Americans Anonymous, because we're each individually as sick as our secrets, which you put out in this book, but I think the country and maybe even the world is as sick as its secrets, and that's why whatever you're doing, you got to a place where it kind of explains, because you've gone everywhere you can to seek truth and what's real and what's that, and I think your book also, like I put it in my third piece of Americans Anonymous, really shows how you got there really through a spiritual opening of everything that you probably couldn't imagine.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned, the sort of the mental health aspect, and, I definitely detail in the book my own suicide attempts. There were several of them, from cutting myself pretty brutally and leaving myself scarred to the point of having to get 20 stitches and, cutting myself to the bone, to swallowing, bottles of Tylenol and all the different things. And in the book, I talk about how, for me, because you mentioned, the Prozac, for me, they tried to put me on Lexapro, which was another, that was when I was in right out of high school, that was the popular one. I think it's still around. And it was frustrating for me, not only because I was definitely in a manic state during that point. I was definitely, for lack of a better term, I was a crazy young man. And in some ways, I sort of thrived on that. I sort of built up this reputation as being the crazy kid. Nobody knew that I was in all advanced classes in high school, that I graduated early. I was just the crazy kid throwing chairs at teachers and getting arrested and getting fights. And I think I reveled in that reputation. It's like, okay, well, now I'm getting attention, and that now looking back, I can see it was like I was craving this attention that I wasn't getting through my father, who was absent. And so it was like, okay, cool. As long as they're paying attention to me, even if I'm just the crazy one, or they want me to go out and be the crash dummy, that's fine. Whatever, I'll be the class clown. And so I did sort of enjoy that idea of like, oh, I'm crazy. But then as I got older and I got more into drugs, and it definitely became clear that like I was not in a good mental state, but I was sort of capable enough of seeing, like, I also don't want to tell these people being the authorities, all the things that are going on in my head, because I know what that looks like. I know what it looks like to be pulled into inpatient treatment centers, or to be forced medicated, or to all this stuff. I'd seen that with other friends. And I talk about that, including one of my girlfriends at the time in the book. And so when I did have this big incident of, slashing my arm open, and I had to go to the hospital, and they essentially kind of tricked me to admit that I had hurt myself. It was pretty obvious, but me and my friend were claiming, oh, we were fighting with knives and we accidentally cut each other or something like that. They didn't buy any of it. But once I said, fine, all right, you're right, I did cut myself, they're like, okay.
You have no choice at that point, honestly.
Well, yeah, then I said, now that you've admitted it, now we cannot let you go unless you undergo a psychological evaluation. And so I was, there enough to say, look, I'm going to BS my way through this, because I know what they're going to do if I tell them how crazy I really feel inside right now.
Exactly.
And they were trying to put me on medicines, and I've been diagnosed bipolar and these kinds of things. And, this is just my own personal thing. If everybody I know has their own journey, but for me, I've always kind of rejected those diagnoses. And of course, now what I know with the medical industry, I see how those things can be very damaging. Again, if somebody feels like that describes them and it applies to them, that's great for you. But for me, it very much felt like, you know what, I think I'm more than just some diagnosis. Like, yes, I definitely feel very manic and very down and up and all over the place, but I think I can find a way to navigate this. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't until, again, I got locked up and then I started meditating and praying and really kind of started getting into like looking. For me, it's like I had to look at the root causes. The reason I was feeling crazy was because of this thing. And the reason I thought drugs were going to solve it was because I was feeling this way. And so I did have times where I did try to seek help, because unfortunately with my heavy drug use, which was largely crystal meth and cocaine and acid and all sorts. I mean, I was doing maximum amounts of everything. I'm an extremist with everything I do, right? So you can see it in my journalism. It was the same sort of approach in my drug use, right? So I did some damage to my body, and some of it still continues to this day. Thankfully, our bodies are beautiful. You would never know that I was on so many drugs with, as far as my mind goes, but definitely I did do some damage to my body, to my lower intestines. And I ended up having to get a colonoscopy at 22 years old because of the damage I had done to myself. And so some of that I'm still dealing with repercussions, but the messed up thing is when I got through some of that and I was like, you know what, I'm ready to go get some help because there's something going on with my body. I'm having all kinds of bad stuff happening. I can't use the bathroom correctly. When I went there to go try to get help, I'll never forget this. I hadn't been to a doctor in years and I was finally getting sober and I was getting all this stuff. And I went there and I told them, look, this is what I'm dealing with. And these doctors, who I originally was going to see my family doctor, but when I showed up, they're like, he's not here today. So it was two doctors I'd never met. They knew me for all of 5 minutes. And then they said, you know what? I think your problem is that you're stressed out and that's causing you this anxiety, which is messing with your stomach. And sure, I was definitely dealing with stress. I'm sure I had anxiety, of course. They walked to the next room and I swear to God, there must have been a freaking big pharma salesman next door, because they came back with a giant box of Lexapro and were just like, here, start taking this, like free of charge, just start taking it. And I remember walking out of there just being like, confused, because I'm like, there's definitely something going on inside my body. Sure, I might be stressed, I might have anxiety, but there's also something physically happening. And I think I took one of those pills, and one of my buddies had also been prescribed it, and he was telling me how he was breaking out into like random rage fits, and just so I never, I threw it all away. And unfortunately, that caused me to not seek any help for another couple more years, because I was like, screw it. If this is the way they think they're going to help me, then I don't even want anything to do with it. And so, I've had those diagnoses. I've had the pills try to force on me both before, during, and after my drug abuse and drug addiction. And one of the things I talk about in the book is that there were times when I was at the height of this. And again, I was not treating people well. I'm like cheating in all my relationships. I'm lying. I'm doing all the different stereotypical things that happen when you're going down this path. And I really started to question whether or not I was a sociopath. And I talk about this in the book because I really, when I would see somebody that I had hurt through my lies or through my actions, and then I could see them crying in front of me, but then I might go out the next day and do the same thing. And I just was trying to, like, there was a part of me that still was like, there was still a good person in there the whole time. And in the book, I even talk about, for a while, I kind of just gave myself this nickname, my friends as well. I just called myself Bad Guy Derrick. And he was the one that took over whenever I did all the messed up things. It was still me, of course, but there was this piece of me this whole time that knew, like, this isn't right. This isn't where I need to be. This isn't what I need to be doing. And so for years I was struggling. I was like, okay, they say I'm bipolar. They say I'm doing this thing. Am I schizophrenic? Am I dealing with all this? And I kind of talk about that. And I talk about, like, in the end, I think, not to give away the conclusion of the book, but I think that I was definitely on the spectrum of what is now known as borderline personality disorder. I don't think I would say I was full on sociopathic or anything, but I definitely, like, when you look at the root causes of what they say borderline personality disorder comes from, a lot of it is situations that I was dealing with, like a very traumatic home life, a acute sense of isolation and of abandonment and these kinds of things. And again, that's not to, pathologize myself and say, okay, well, now because of that, I need to be medicated or et cetera. It's just, for me, as I was struggling with the mental health issues and the suicide attempts and the drug use, it's like I was trying to make sense of all of it. And looking back, I can definitely see, as a young man, the drugs were just making things worse. I don't know why I never thought maybe I should stop, and that might make things a little more.
Wouldn't that be great?
makes a little more sense.
How it works.
But that's not how it works. And so, yeah. And so the book deals with all that. It talks about drug addiction. It talks about like
Very
the whole
important.
struggles. It talks about my, another angle was like when I got locked up, and a part of my family, half my family is Mexican, going back to Mexico 3 generations ago. We've been in the U.S. since 1700s. My other side of the family is Czech and Native American. Like I'm a mutt, like a lot of people. And so when I got locked up and I started to experience firsthand the sort of racism and the way that people immediately cling to what's familiar. So, the white guys hang out with the white guys and the Mexicans or whatever. That's never been the way I live. I have friends of all backgrounds, all races, all, ethnicities, etc. But I definitely had people coming up to me and trying to tell me like, hey, you can't be talking to this person, or you need to come over here with our group because we have the similar skin color and stuff like that.
Right.
And I did my best to stay out of all that and just say like, look, I'm just here to do my time. I'm not getting involved in any kind of gang stuff. And he sort of like,
Right.
but it was just all of those experiences as a 21-year-old man who thought I knew something about the world. And then you get locked up and you realize I don't know shit. Like this is a whole world that I have never been introduced to. And so the book kind of details all of that, like the day I got arrested, everything that led up to the day I got arrested, my time in and out of prison, and then afterwards navigating being a felon, dealing with probation, dealing with parole, dealing with that whole system as well. And then, eventually waking up.
Well, we need people to who have experienced that to actually lay out what's going on, because 72% of people that are born into HUD housing never leave it or end up in jail. And I learned that about 3 weeks ago. And I'll tell you something else, because I went through the same thing as a female in Hollywood. So around the same age group, everything. But I'm telling you, it's 2 generations of children went through this. And it wasn't, I don't think, until they started okaying medicating very young children, because after it was very early for me. So the doctor that I was brought to because of my family, my sister was already, she's 7 years older than me. So she was like in medical school. So like I'm much younger, and I got prescribed as a very young kid from University of Pennsylvania, child psychiatrist. And I think I was like I think I was in some kind of test case. It didn't work out well. So all I have to say is like, plus you're told very young that you have all these things. And then when I was in Hollywood, I was a writer, and I was lucky enough to go to a good college that helped me a lot in my early career, which is not what most people do there. But I will say I really started to see big pharma's face in a lot of Hollywood projects that were pushing at a certain time, whether it was like the whole transgender thing, but also I saw them pushing Prozac, pushing, look at Homeland, pushing, like taking the psychiatric diagnosis and putting it out there in the public. And then while Homeland was on, I'm not kidding, that while it was on, at least a dozen people in my life were told by a doctor that they were bipolar. And that's a very serious illness and all of that. But what I am telling you is that they'll drop this in the media. And then after COVID is when because I started writing during COVID, my own book, which I was calling it Manic in Manhattan. I'll go back to it someday. But what I will say is that, there is a lot of the forces that you and I deal with in the global public-private partnership and the Panopticon and all of this. And that's why I called my book Americans Anonymous, because I said, we have dealers, we have pushers, we have, an apparatus that survives off of literally making people sick and keeping them sick.
Absolutely.
And, and it's so bad.
I was going to say, it's interesting you bring up the sort of the role of the media, because in the book, one of the things I remembered as I was writing this, because so many of the pieces of the book are things that are in my mind, but I'm also been really blessed that I do have journals from back then. So I literally was able to, put things in there like, hey, this is what I was thinking in 2003, in 2004, 2005, and even some old, if anybody who remembers LiveJournal, which still exists on the internet. I had a LiveJournal back in 2004. I'll never tell you how to find it, but I found some of my old writings when I was at the peak of my meth use and depression. And I did put like snippets of those journals in the book to just kind of make it more authentic. But one of the things that I recalled as I was writing it is that I was probably always going to become a drug dealer one way or the other. And largely it was because of the influence of Hollywood, because I clearly remember, I put this story in the book. I remember being 2003, I just graduated high school. While my friends were finishing the second semester of senior year, I went right into community college, got my own apartment. I was, I'm thinking I'm an adult. I'm doing everything. And I remember being in my apartment with my girlfriend at the time and watching the Johnny Depp movie Blow. And for those who haven't seen that, that's all about, what's his name? Boston George. And, he's a real life drug dealer who's since passed. But they definitely they do what Hollywood does, which they glamorize it. You got the drugs and the women and the parties and all the stuff. And I remember clear as day watching that movie, turning to my girlfriend and say, I'm going to sell drugs. Like, even despite everything I'd seen growing up.
It made it look so cool.
Exactly.
Why would you ever have a real job if you can live like that? Or, just like the
I literally sat there and started calculating how much money I was making at that warehouse job I had at the time. And like, okay, this is how much extra money I have, because I was just so enthralled because of what you said. They made it look so cool. Even though I grew up with a father who was in and out of prison because of his own drug use, you would think that would be the last thing I would ever want to do. But I watched this Hollywood movie and I swear, like clear as day, I turned to her, I'm like, I'm going to sell drugs. And it was still maybe a year or two after that before I kind of fully got into that life. But I definitely know that, of course, I take responsibility for my own actions, but that movie absolutely did inspire me to at least like, wow, that looks like so much fun. I want to do that. And, I talk about this in the book too, even after I did, because I did kick meth, which is one of my proudest achievements ever. I did get sober off meth in September 2005. I was living in a crack meth house for a while. Eventually, I was like, I made it clear to the people I was with, like, I don't want to use anything anymore. Please leave me alone. And they were willing to at least leave me alone. But I had burned so many bridges at the time, I didn't really have anywhere to go. So I had my vehicle outside. I just sat at that apartment. And I literally, I do credit cannabis for helping me quit crystal, because my anxiety, everything was so shot that I just smoked weed and sat in the corner of this room and watched this insanity. And it's like, okay, 1 day, okay, 2 days. By day 8 of being sober from crystal, I literally just got up, walked out of that crazy place, got in my car, went back to my parents' house and said, please let me come back. I'm trying to get my life together. And so I did get sober off that. But the other thing is, like, I was still in love. I was addicted to the lifestyle. And so even years after I'd quit crystal, and this is why I say I kind of went back and forth, because I got arrested. I did a whole year. And you think I would have got the lesson, but within weeks I was out selling again because I started.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
People. And there is some truth to that whole idea of you got to change your people, places, and things, right? And at the beginning, I thought, okay, well, I can still go hang out with these old friends. I'm not going to be using crystal anymore. But then, like a lot of times in the drug world, people believe, and maybe it comes from some genuine place, but people believe they're doing good by giving you drugs. Like, hey, I just want to look out for you, and here's let me give you this and you can go make some money. I had friends doing that. I had a friend who was like, yo, you got fresh out, let me give you a pound of weed and you can go make yourself some money. I was like, look, man, I'm really trying to stay out of this. I don't want to be involved in this anymore. Here, 2 pounds, man. By the time he's giving me 5 pounds, I'm loaded up in the car. Yeah. I'm like, all right, fine. And you can only be around that so long before you get
relapse is also
Exactly.
Relapse is part of recovery. And so many people, that was a problem I had all my years in LA, was like, because, people would fall out and they'd come back and they'd feel so like they failed. And luckily I did have a lot of good friends in recovery. And it was always like relapse is part of recovery. It just is. And when you go to jail once and you get out, you kind of are like, it's very, that's what you're talking about too with prison reform. Is it's set up to be a revolving door, and then to find out the things I found out about, because I have my new book coming out about 1944 to 1954, and a lot of how America ended up being, in my opinion, captured. And what you see is not just big pharma and all of that, but you see like the judicial system or this or that. There's just so many obvious problems that could be fixed with common sense. My conclusion is, the people that make the money off of them do not want them fixed. And it's only going to come from telling your story, because there are way more of me and you, and we're from two totally different worlds. But believe me, my darkest day was, I'm sure as dark as yours. And what I have to say is, every day, but for the grace of God, am I alive. That I made it out of Hollywood alive is a miracle. But what I will say, though, is that to share the story is so important. I'm so jealous, because I kept journals too the whole time. And there were some real dark years. And I will tell you, I wrote everything down. And then when I finally left LA and I got a job, I went back to New York, but I stopped and I put all this stuff at my parents' house in Florida. And my mother went into my journals and started reading them. And I kept them because I knew someday I wanted to write a book about it. I was a screenwriter, so of course I would want them. And she threw them out. She said that they were so sad and depressing, and it broke her heart. And first of all, she should never have read them, but hey, that's part of the problem. But
Yeah. No, I definitely understand.
still to this day feel like, I mean, that's okay. But what I feel like to this day, though, is that sharing the story, I think, is so healing. And frankly, I always say to people that come to me that want to get sober or recovery or whatever, I always say, you got to find somebody who already did it. You know, nobody no doctor is going to help you. And, you know, Kathy O'Brien is probably my closest friend on planet Earth. And she says, you know, recovery, and she recovered from the worst life ever in MK Ultra. She always says recovery is an inside job. Nobody can heal you.
Absolutely.
Nobody can help you. It is an inside job. And until people realize, no, going to rehab, look what just happened with Rob Reiner's kid. He was in rehab 18 times. There's something terribly wrong. And I knew a lot of people in Hollywood that went in and out of those upscale, no insurance rehabs that I could never have afforded in a million years. And they go,
Ultimately, you got to want out.
it's a business too. I mean, people have to understand Solarless is a business. Rehab is a business. The insurance companies, they will keep people in rehab for as long as they can if they have a golden, if they come from, you know, big pharma, or they have a great insurance firm company. But if they don't, they are throwing you out as soon as they possibly can, and sicker, because now they put you on psychiatric meds and you had to take them or you couldn't get out. And now you're out there. And I dealt with this in New York too, because I dealt
Always
with
a whole industry.
yeah, I dealt with this Thrive New York City, where they were basically, you know, if you decided that you would go on drugs, you wouldn't get charged. But then they were putting people on drugs that the side effect was, you know, homicidal thoughts, suicidal thoughts, and they're giving them to them and they're homeless. And you're thinking, what is going on? So it's very important to tell these stories. And it's
Absolutely
excited that you're.
To your point, Mel, about this, you know, you have to want it. Like, you could go into the richest, biggest rehab you want, and if you don't want it, you're going to come right out. Like, I witnessed that over and over with my father. As I said, I mean, I remember being 5 years old. Probably my first memory is going to visit him in prison. And I remember my mom and my aunt were going to this, you know, giant building, razor wire, the whole thing. And I remember the guards telling them that their shorts were too short. We had to go back to the car and change, and just all this stuff. I remember going to visit my dad. Why does he have a broken arm? Why has he got a bruise on his face? Why, you know, seeing him, getting to hang out with him for an hour, me and my brother and my sister, we'd hang all over him, and then they'd say visitor time's over, and then we'd cry our eyes out. He'd get out. He was probably never free for more than, I'd say, 2 weeks before you know, mom would show up and say, sorry guys, but dad's back in jail. And, you know, it was this cycle in and out and in and out until I got to the point of being, as I said, like after being this sad, depressed kid that was already starting to, like, you know, cut myself and do self-harm at a young age. I think because of this depression from my dad coming in and out. When I was 14, he was released, and he was supposed to be coming to my grandparents for Christmas Eve. We always go there for Christmas Eve, and it was supposed to be a big deal because my grandfather and him, they had severed their relationship before I was even born, but pretty much right around the time I was born, because apparently my dad had stolen an engagement ring from my grandpa when he was at the, you know, in his drug days. And my grandpa was like, all right, we're willing to put that all behind us. Let him come. You know, he's out. Let's all have Christmas together. And I remember showing up at my grandma's, and the moment I, you know, walked in, the moment they opened the door, I didn't see my father, first of all. And right away, though, I could just feel like something was off. I'm looking around, like, where's he at? I'm 14 at the time. So I'm very much like, felt like a crucial moment. Like, I need him to be in my life. And if he's not, like, I'm over it. And I remember, and like, looking around, I don't see him. I go to the bathroom, and I overhear my grandma telling my mom, they've already arrested him. He's already on the way back, you know, to go do more time. And I remember clear as day going to the bathroom, crying my eyes out, looking at the mirror, and just being like, fuck this. I'm never going to let anybody hurt me again. And that's like the moment where I really kind of put that shell around me. You know, we think that sort of that darkness is empowering us. It felt like, you know what, I'm not going to let anybody hurt me again. So I'm just going to turn. I became super angry. That's when I started getting in fights. I started getting in all this kind of trouble. And I just remember, like, the different memories like that of wanting him so badly to turn things around, not just for me, but for himself. And no matter what we did, no matter how often he saw his 3 kids crying, or how many, you know, trucks my grandma got him, or how much money he was sent, or how many tears were shed, you know, it had to be up to him. And so when I found myself getting locked up, which coincidentally happened to be the same week my father was getting out for one of his prison sentences, was the same week I got locked up. So that was even more like a kick in the nuts of like, oh my God, here I am, I'm turning into this dude. And you know, and it just was this back and forth. But ultimately, towards the end, you know, he did get sober for a little bit, and he spent a couple of years of his life out from behind bars, and I had some very kind of odd moments where it was kind of like this role reversal where I was kind of parenting him and just saying like, look, man, you're 50 years old now. Your kids are grown up. You know, I had my moment to say to him, like, I forgive you. Everything's okay. Everything turned out the way it's supposed to. But for your sake, like, you know, stop, you know, figure this out, because I'm sure you don't want to live with your mom for the rest of your life. I'm sure you don't want to just be in and out of prison for the rest of your life. You're only in your 50s. You could still have, you know, meet somebody, get a job, and turn this could just be one dark chapter of your life, and you could move on. And you know, there was times when it seemed like he was on that path, but ultimately, you know, he wasn't able to make it. And in June 2018, he did die of a drug overdose. He passed. But for me, and this is one of the chapters in the book, like one of the final chapters, is I really talk about that. I knew that it was for me. Like, it was, whether he was ever going to change his life or not, I went and actually saw him at a halfway house when he got released. My brother and sister weren't quite ready to talk to him at this time, but I was just like, look, I got out of prison myself. I'm turning my life around. I had just started to get into activism, and I needed to go see him and just let him know, like, everything happened the way it's supposed to happen. Please don't hold any guilt for anything you did to me. Like, let that shit go and be okay, because you need to figure your life out. And I'm grateful, so grateful to this day that I made the effort to do that, because I think this would be a lot harder to deal with if I hadn't made that effort to just go there and sort of, you know, because again, it wasn't about him. It was just for me. It was like, I need to do this for myself, you know, and let it go and heal from it. Yeah. But yeah, ultimately I had to make a choice. And the sad fact is, you know, I know different people hearing this will have family members or their own addictions. And at the end of the day, we can do whatever we want for those people, but they have to really want it. Because as I said earlier, I have several friends who I was locked up with, and some of them, they figured it out before me. They got locked up once and they never went back. Others are still cycling in and out of prison, and some of them are dead, you know. And so it's just the way things work out sometimes. But my hope and my prayer with writing this memoir, and the reason I bothered to do it, not only because it's been part of my healing journey, even as I'm writing and kind of reliving some of this stuff, you know, I'm shedding tears. My mom also found some of the letters I wrote her from prison, so I was able to go back and read those and kind of put some of them into the book. But my hope and my prayer is that anybody who is or has or maybe in the future struggling in these ways or knows somebody, that they can get something from this and maybe just realize that they're not alone, and that they, you know, there is hope on the other side.
And I want to say something about your whole story, is that you have broken and dug into a lot of stories about the horrors of CPS, the Franklin scandal, the true story about the Epstein trafficking, Haiti. You know, you have gone there to expose the abuse of children more than most people out there. I think one of the only people that really went into some of these CPS or adoption scams and all of that. So somewhere in you is a child that wants to still help other children that are living like that. And I had a friend that was arrested. They were mafia in Philly, and both parents got arrested, and those kids went to CPS, and really, I don't think they ever saw them again. So, you know, there's the whole thing of also your mission has been also included those children and children like you, and you really have to, you know, we have to say that a big part of your work that attracted me when I first found you was some of that stuff about like the cult-like stuff with the children and everything that you've gone dark into. But it must be related. That's the last thing I'll ask you, because I kept for a while. But you know, you've really made that a part of your signature body of work.
Well, you know, what's interesting about that, Mel, is one of the little stories that I share in there, and I hadn't even thought about this till I was looking back, that I can see, and maybe this is like this with many of our lives, as we look back, we can kind of see how the path was being laid before us, right? And even back then, while I was dealing with going in and out of prison, I could see that the seeds of my current investigative spirit were definitely there. You know, just one example, I was a trustee at one of the places I got sent to. So for those who don't know, it's basically, you know, you're a worker inside the jail. And so you get extra privileges, or you get to go places most people don't. So I was a trustee, so I would often get sent to some of the administrative buildings where the guards and the, you know, the so-called counselors were at, and I would be sweeping up or doing whatever. And I was there with a couple of guys this one time, and I happened to notice this bulletin board, and it was a bulletin board like saying, oh, the Christmas party is coming up, or just stuff like that for the employees. But there was this one bulletin board that was very explicit, and it basically said that there had been a test that they found that the water at the facility that all of us inmates were drinking, showering in, making our coffee with, etc., that they had found 10 times the legal safe level of arsenic in the water. And it was an advisory to all of the employees, inmates, the guards and all of them, to bring their own bottle of water. And I showed this to one of the other guys. I'm like, look at this. Do you see what this says? And so we kind of sneakily took it down. I put it in my pocket and I took it back to our bunks and was just kind of looking at it and like, oh my God, this is pretty clear. Like we're like drinking poison water. We're showering in poison water. And I even brought it up to one of the so-called counselors. And I say so-called because, this is a prison, but they claim that you're getting treatment. So you see a counselor once a month or something, and they don't really do much. But I brought it to her attention. I said, look, there's apparently warnings about this. And we started to notice all of the guards and all of the employees, they were having bottled water. And I brought it to her attention and she said something like, well, most of you are here for drug addiction and all kinds of things. And now all of a sudden you guys care about your health, and just was super dismissive of it. So
disgusting.
Yeah, I know. So I told her, I said, well, aren't we supposed to be here to heal ourselves? So
yeah.
So I took the paper and I snuck it out. I was able to, whenever you mail, they look at your envelope and everything. But I was able to kind of sneakily put this warning into the envelope and send it to my girlfriend at the time. And I told her, like, hold on to this till I get out. Me and my buddies had big plans of like, we're going to sue the heck out of this place and shut it down. Unfortunately, she lost the damn thing and we never were able to do anything about it. But looking back, I'm like, that was really part of this investigative spirit that I think was in me well before I ever thought I want to be a journalist. Just this sense of like injustice is happening. Something is wrong here. People are lying about it and wanting to try to hold them accountable. And so it's just interesting being able to look back on my story and kind of see those seeds that were there that would later on turn into my journalism.
Yeah, totally. Oh my God. I'm thinking about it. And the same thing with me, because I saw this Thrive New York City and they were giving all these pills to all these homeless people just to put them on a list. It was like under de Blasio, all the money disappeared. And I was trying to help a friend. And we also have to make it very clear, your situation that happened to you, it's a very big problem, because even if your mother or anyone wanted to help you, once you're over 18, if you are a drug addict or you are mentally ill or anything else, like the government won't help you and your family can't do anything. Like there's just a lot that needs to happen when it comes to all of this stuff. And I'm so grateful that you're talking about it and knowing the work that you've done to expose abuse of children and just the ugliest things this is how I feel about Kathy too. It's like, the people that were damaged the most, but that came out the best are the best people to help people. So, that is what I think of you and your book and the work you do. And the work you do is phenomenal. So tell everyone where they can get the book. And also, let's not forget about Pyramid of Power. If you want to spend your holidays learning about what's really happening in the world, you'll want that too. But this is a great book. Also, if you have somebody that is suffering or in recovery, I have a lot of friends for some reason right now in rehab. Again, So,
yeah.
so it's good because people feel very alone and isolated, and like it's only them. And you'll hear the story that he's saying, or even mine or anyone's, like a million times over. I think there's a lot more of us than there are, particularly in our age range. So
I agree. Yeah, and especially the holidays are a hard time, and a lot of people do feel alone, and they turn to drinking or to drugs and other things like that. So everybody can find the book. It's available now. I don't even think we've said the title yet, but it's A Man of My Word: How I Overcame Addiction, Depression, and Mental and Physical Prisons. The website is just amanofmyword.com. You guys can go there and you'll see the description. You'll see the table of contents. I also was lucky enough to get a nice review from James Corbett of the Corbett Report.
Cool.
And you can pick it up all the usual places, of course. And I do want to mention that just, on the book, one of my ideas, if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out to me. What I would like to do is try to get a little bit of funding together. And I want to send this book to as many treatment centers, rehabilitation centers, et cetera, places where people are in recovery, and just stock it there for them. If anybody wants to pick it up and read it, great. Just try to get it out to as many people as possible, because everybody who I've shared it with has I've gotten some really good feedback from it, and it's a story of redemption. It's a story of overcoming. It's a story of triumph. It is my, as I said, truly raw, authentic, gritty story. So this is not the Derrick Broze you see today. So when you read this, you might be like, holy crap, I can't believe this is things Derrick was doing or going through. But I think that's necessary, because as you said, so many people are dealing with this, and if we don't talk about it, it's not going to get better. So one of my hopes is to get this out to as many of those kinds of places as possible. And also, I'm going to continue to do the journalism I've always done, but I will say that in the coming years, I am going to be speaking more and more about addiction. In fact, I have plans to launch some type of organization. I don't know if it'll be a nonprofit or anything like that, but some sort of organization that'll probably be called the Troy Broze Foundation. That's my father's name. And in his honor, because for two reasons. For one, I don't want his memory to just be that of somebody who dealt with drug addiction his whole life and then overdosed and died. You know, I think was more than that, like many people who have gone through that and, you know, found themselves on that path. But I want it to be a place that I can advocate for other people and find ways, both, you know, whether it's AA, if that works for people, or other non-traditional recovery methods, like, because mine was definitely not a traditional path. I talk about AA in the book. I talk about meditation, prayer, and all the different things that I had to do to navigate. So I want to use that as a way to reach more people. So if you're interested in any of that, you can reach out to me and let's collaborate on that. But the main website is amanofmyword.com. And then you mentioned the Pyramid of Power. This is actually a really good week for me right now because the book just came out and the final episode of the Pyramid of Power is out now as well. And it is going to be exclusively on the Civil platform that I told you I was working with before. It'll be there for 5 weeks and then it'll go public next month in mid to late January. Everybody can watch it at thepyramidofpower.net. But if you want to be the first to see it, you can go to civil.com/TCR. That's CIVL.com/TCR. You can sign up for their platform. And if you want to get a 20% discount, the code TCR20, it'll give you 20% off an annual subscription. They have my entire series. I just did a 10-week opt-out challenge for them. They got a bunch of other exclusive content. So if people want to see it first, you can go there. If not, just be patient, wait till the end of January, and it'll be out everywhere else. But yeah, it's a big week. The book's coming out. Pyramid of Power is out. We're also about to release the book version of the Pyramid of Power as well. That'll be out in the next week or so. So lots happening.
Great. Now tell people what TCR is.
The Conscious Resistance. Yeah, TCR20 is the discount. That stands for Conscious Resistance, which is my main website.
Other website where you can look at a lot of his journalism, also on The Last American Vagabond and elsewhere. Thank you so much, Derrick Broze. Great to talk to Derrick Broze, a man of his word. Thank you so much.